No. When my own father coldly slid an $18 million check to my sister and declared I wasn't worth a single cent, I thought I'd been erased from the wealthy Blackwood family forever. But in that very moment, a blood-sealed envelope revealed a buried secret. I had just inherited something worth billions that my own family was terrified of. The Blackwood estate in Oyster Bay stood like a monument to a past I never truly inhabited. Inside the library, the scent of sandalwood was thick, mingling with the cold, metallic smell of the rain beating against the leaded glass windows. My family sat in a circle of velvet and mahogany, a tableau of perfection that made me feel like a smudge on a masterpiece. I am Orion Blackwood, and this was the day the silence finally broke. My father, Garrison, sat at the head of the table. He was a man of sharp angles and even sharper silences. Beside him, my sister Fallon glowed with a predatory confidence. She had always been the golden child, the one who spoke the language of profit and prestige that I could never master. To them, I was a scientist in a family of bankers, a boy who preferred the secrets of the soil to the fluctuations of the stock market. The estate attorney cleared his throat, but the real power sat with Garrison. Without a word, my father reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a slip of paper. He slid it across the polished wood. It came to a stop directly in front of Fallon. $18,500,000. Fallon did not smile. She simply placed a manicured hand over the check, claiming it as if it were her birthright. Then Garrison turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were like two chips of gray ice, devoid of any warmth or recognition. "And for you, Orion," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Your grandfather left a specific instruction in the primary ledger. It says that you are intelligent. It says you are capable." He wore a weathered wool coat and carried a leather briefcase that looked as old as the estate itself. "There is a secondary document," Elias announced, his voice steady and echoing through the high ceilings. My mother, Lucille, bolted upright. Her face, usually a mask of porcelain perfection, shattered. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling with a fear I had never seen before. "We agreed. Garrison, you said that would not be read. You promised." Garrison narrowed his eyes, his grip tightening on the edge of the table. "Thorne, that matter is settled. The estate has been distributed." "Not all of it," Elias replied calmly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. It was thick, yellowed with age, and sealed with a heavy glob of crimson wax. As he placed it on the table, I saw the imprint in the wax, the seal of a gnarled root, my grandfather Thatcher's personal emblem. Lucille let out a choked scream, her hand flying to her throat as if she were being strangled. She looked at the envelope as if it were a live grenade. "You cannot open that," she hissed. "It will ruin everything." Elias ignored her. He pushed the envelope toward me. This was submitted 11 years ago. The envelope was filed 11 years back. The sabotage started later and ran for the decade that followed. He said to me, his voice softening, "Under the explicit instruction that it be opened only by Orion in this room on this day. It does not belong to the Blackwood Corporation. It belongs to the son who remembers the earth." My fingers trembled as I touched the cold wax. I looked at my father, whose face was now a mask of suppressed fury, and my sister, whose smugness had vanished into a look of sharp calculation. Whatever was in this envelope was the one thing they could not buy, and it was the one thing they feared. I did not open it there. The bus left me at a crossroads where the asphalt shimmered like a dying mirage. The transition from the air-conditioned elegance of Oyster Bay to the raw, unshielded furnace of Taos, New Mexico, was not just a change in geography, it was a flaying of the soul. The wind here did not blow. It stung, carrying coarse red sand that found its way into my eyes and the very pores of my skin. I walked for 3 miles, my boots crunching on the sun-baked earth until the silhouette of the ranch appeared against the jagged horizon. The house was a low-slung fortress of red adobe, its walls weathered by decades of desert sun. The air smelled of parched earth and the sharp, dry perfume of burning sage. I stood at the crooked wooden gate, my pulse drumming a frantic rhythm. When the heavy timber door finally creaked open, it was not the warmth I remembered that greeted me. It was a wall of cold restraint. My grandmother Hazel stood on the shaded porch. Her skin was the color of mahogany, lined with deep furrows like the desert floor itself. She stood with her arms crossed, her eyes like flint. "So," she said, her voice raspy and unforgiving, "the prodigal son finally finds his way to the dirt. I suppose the champagne ran out in New York. Grandma, it is me. It is Orion." I stammered, the heat of the porch floor burning through the soles of my shoes. "I know who you are," she snapped. She stepped down, her shadow long and dark against the red dust. "I also know that Thatcher called for you every day until the machine stopped humming. He waited for a voice that never came. He thought you were ashamed of this place. He thought you had become one of them, too polished for a man who worked with his hands." "That is not true," I said, my voice cracking. "I never received a call. I wrote letters. I tried to reach him for years." I pulled my old laptop from my bag, my hands shaking so violently that I could barely type. I bypassed the security of the family's old internal Cervera skill I had perfected in the isolation of my college dorm. I looked for the communication logs from 10 years ago. What I found was a nightmare of digital manipulation. Fallon had not just redirected the calls, she had built a digital wall between us. But as I scrolled deeper into the encrypted files Thatcher had hidden under the name Terra Root, a much darker truth began to emerge. I found a series of wire transfers, massive silent withdrawals from Thatcher's independent research endowment. This was money intended to fund the restoration of the Southwest's dying topsoil, a legacy Thatcher had built over 40 years. The signatures on the authorization forms were not Garrison's. They were Fallon's. I sat back in the creaking wooden chair, the silence of the desert outside suddenly deafening. 10 years ago, my father Garrison had made a series of catastrophic investments in offshore shipping that had nearly bankrupted the Blackwood name. To save the family's public image, Fallon had quietly drained her grandfather's life work. She had used Thatcher's soul to pay for Garrison's ego. The realization hit me like a physical weight. My parents, the formidable Garrison and the elegant Lucille, were not the masters of the Blackwood estate, they were captives. Fallon held the records of their failure. She had bought their loyalty with stolen money and kept them on a leash of shame. They were nothing more than puppets, and Fallon was the one pulling the strings from the shadows of Oyster Bay. I looked at Hazel. The bitterness in her eyes was starting to fade, replaced by a haunting realization as she watched my face pale. "She did not just silence me, Grandma," I whispered, my voice trembling with a new cold fury. "She robbed him. She robbed this land." I cleared a layer of fine desert dust from a long steel workbench, revealing an array of equipment that made my heart skip a beat. There were high-resolution electron microscopes, refrigerated centrifuges, and rows of sealed glass terrariums containing soil profiles from across the continent. Thatcher had not been just a rancher. He had been a pioneer in soil microbiology, working in a silence that I now understood was a sanctuary from the prying eyes of the Blackwood Corporation. In the center of the workbench sat a rugged military-grade external hard drive. My fingers felt cold as I plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered, demanding a biometric bypass. I placed my thumb on the scanner, and the interface bloomed into life. A single folder sat on the desktop, labeled in Thatcher's digital signature, Terra Root. As I clicked through the files, the sheer scale of his genius began to unfurl. Terra Root was not a simple reforestation project. It was a sophisticated bioremediation technology designed to resurrect dead soil land that had been rendered sterile by industrial chemicals and extreme drought. The core of the project was the cultivation of a specific strain of endemic mycorrhizal fungi. These organisms created a symbiotic network with plant roots, drastically increasing their nutrient uptake and water retention. I read through the white papers Thatcher had authored but never published. He spoke of carbon sequestration at a level the world had never seen. By restoring the soil microbiome, Terra Root could turn vast tracts of desertified land into massive carbon sinks, effectively breathing life back into the atmosphere while stabilizing the local climate. This was the answer to the global food crisis and the key to reversing ecological collapse. And it was all here, hidden in the red dust of New Mexico. My eyes blurred as I looked at the data. Thatcher was standing beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder, looking at me with a pride that I had spent the last decade convinced was a lie. I turned the photograph over. In Thatcher's bold, steady hand, a message was written in ink that had begun to fade but still carried the weight of a commandment. The best seeds do not sprout in Silk Orion. They sprout in trials. The world will try to bury you under their silence, but they forget that you are a seed. When the time comes, let the earth speak through you. You are my greatest legacy. A single tear fell onto the back of the photo, smudging the edge of the word legacy. The hollow ache that had lived in my chest since the reading of the will began to transform. It was no longer a void, it was a fire. I realized that the $18 million Garrison had given Fallon was a pittance, a distraction to keep her satisfied, while the real power of the Blackwood name remained buried here with me. I looked around the laboratory at the microscopes and the fungal cultures, and I felt Thatcher's presence in the room. He had not left me to earn my own existence out of cruelty. He had left me here because he knew that I was the only one who could handle the truth of Terra Root. He had given me a weapon to fight the family that had discarded me, and a map to build a future they could never understand. That night, I did not sleep. I sat under the glow of the laboratory lights, memorizing the genetic sequences of the Terra Root fungi and the blueprints for the restoration hubs. I was no longer the driftwood child washed up on a pristine shore. I was the architect of something undeniable. Tomorrow, I would leave for the north, taking these secrets with me. The Blackwoods thought they had cut me off from the world, but they had actually given me the keys to change it. Finally, there was Reese, a single mother and former biologist, who had walked away from a career in corporate pharmaceuticals to find something that actually mattered. We were a collection of outcasts, the discarded pieces of a society that valued profit over the planet. We had no venture capital, no fancy marketing team, and very little heat. To save our meager resources for the fungal cultures and the electricity required for the bioreactors, we worked in the dim glow of desk lamps and wore thick wool coats inside the shop. Our hands were often stained with the dark, rich inoculants of Thatcher's Terra Root project, and our meals were shared over a makeshift table of plywood and sawn-off barrels. The work was grueling. We were attempting to scale a technology that Thatcher had perfected in a small laboratory to something that could heal entire regions. Every morning, I would lean over the microscope, watching as the blue-green filaments of the mycorrhizal fungi began to weave through samples of sterile, depleted soil. It was a microscopic war for life, and every time a seedling sprouted in our test plots, the fire in our hearts grew brighter. We were not just building a laboratory, we were building a sanctuary for the questions that the rest of the world had dismissed. However, the shadow of the Oyster Bay was long, and it was not long before it found us. One Tuesday morning, a black sedan that looked like a polished Predator pulled up to the cracked sidewalk outside the shop. A courier in a crisp suit stepped out holding a thick stack of legal documents. He did not say a word as he handed them to me and drove away, leaving the scent of expensive exhaust in the damp air. I opened the folder in the middle of our workspace with Lyra Nash and Reese standing in a silent circle around me. It was not a lawsuit for money. I looked at the documents, then at the stained, calloused hands of my team, and then at the vibrant green sprouts pushing through the soil in our bioreactors. My father and sister did not realize that by trying to take my name, they were only proving how much they feared what I was becoming. They thought the name Blackwood belonged to their bank accounts and their charity galas. They did not understand that the name was written in the soil Thatcher had taught me to love. The legal threat was designed to paralyze us, to drain our limited funds in a courtroom battle we could not afford. But as I looked at the fierce determination in Nash's eyes and the quiet brilliance on Lyra's face, I knew we would not hide. If Garrison and Fallon wanted to bring this fight into the light of a courtroom, I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would not just defend my name, I would show the world exactly what the Blackwood legacy was supposed to be. Let them come. I said, my voice steady for the first time in years. They think they are protecting a reputation. They do not realize they are fighting a forest. The courtroom in Portland was a cavern of white marble and sterile fluorescent light that hummed with a low, persistent vibration. It was a space designed for the cold application of law devoid of the warmth of the earth or the chaotic beauty of the desert. On one side sat the Blackwood legal team of phalanx of men in charcoal suits led by my father Garrison and my sister Fallon. They looked like statues of carved granite. On the other side sat Lyra Nash Reese and myself. We were the dirt under the fingernails of the American dream, and today they intended to scrub us away. Fallon took the stand first. She was a master of the rehearsed narrative. With a voice like silk and steel, she presented a series of digital exhibits to the judge. He truly believed that by taking my name, he could extinguish my existence. When it was my turn to speak, I did not go to the lectern with a prepared speech. I walked to the center of the room with a single digital tablet. I looked at the judge, a woman with tired eyes who had seen 1,000 families tear each other apart for scraps of paper. I am not here to fight for the name Blackwood. I began, my voice clear and unnervingly calm. In fact, I am happy to relinquish it. To me, that name has come to represent a legacy of silence and theft. If my family wants their brand back, they may have it. From this day forward, I will be known simply as Orion of the Terra Root. A sharp intake of breath came from my mother Lucille in the front row. The Blackwood lawyers looked at each other, confused by the lack of resistance. They had expected a bloody battle for the title. Instead, I was handing it to them on a platter. However, I continued, before we finalize this separation, there is the matter of the property in Taos, New Mexico, which was left to me in its entirety by Thatcher Blackwood. Fallon let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Keep your dust and your Adobe Orion. We have already established that the land is worthless. It is a desert graveyard. Actually, I said, tapping the tablet to project a document onto the courtroom screens. The land is not just dust. Over the last 4 months, my team has conducted a deep stratigeological survey. My grandfather Thatcher was not just a soil scientist. He was a mineralogist who understood the intersection of biology and geology. The screen filled with a cross-section of the Taos Ranch. Deep beneath the red adobe and the roots of the sagebrush lay a massive, untapped vein of neodymium and dysprosium rare earth elements, essential for the production of high-capacity electric motors and green energy infrastructure. I looked directly at Fallon, who was now shaking. You took $18 million from the estate and thought you had won, I said. But in your greed to isolate me, you convinced our father to sign away all claims to Thatcher's minor properties. You traded a global treasure for a single check. I own the land, I own the technology required to access it, and now, thanks to this injunction, I am no longer bound by any corporate loyalty to this family. The silence was broken by the frantic scribbling of the journalists. The Blackwood lawyers were suddenly whispering in a panicked huddle. They had come here to strip me of a name, only to realize they had stripped themselves of a fortune. They had tried to bury me in the dirt, never realizing that the dirt was the most valuable thing they ever owned. Garrison looked at me not with ice, but with a sudden desperate recognition. But it was too late. I walked away from the lectern, leaving the name Blackwood on the floor like a discarded shell. I was no longer an outsider. I was the master of the very earth they had despised. 3 years have passed since the fluorescent lights of the courtroom faded into the vibrant emerald of the fields. I am standing on a ridge in Taos, New Mexico, looking down at a landscape that was once a graveyard of red dust. Today, it is a sea of swaying prairie grasses and young willow trees, their roots anchored deep by the invisible shimmering networks of the Terra Root fungi. The air no longer tastes of parched sand. It smells of life, of wet stone, and of a future that finally feels secure. After the trial, Garrison reached out to me. He did not call as a father, but as a businessman. He offered me a seat on the board of the Blackwood Corporation and a multi-billion-dollar buyout for the Terra root technology and the mining rights. He promised me the world if I would only sign the papers. Sometimes presence is a more powerful language than any apology. She is now one of our most dedicated volunteers, helping shy students find their voices through the science she once tried to destroy. Before I left the ranch this morning, I sat on the porch and opened the final wooden box my grandmother Hazel had given me. Inside was a single unsealed envelope. The handwriting was Thatcher's, bold and unwavering. Orion, the letter read. Inheritance is what people leave behind because they have no choice. Legacy is the map you draw for others to follow while you are still here. You were never meant to fit into their world because you were busy creating a new one. Do not measure your worth by the hands that withheld love. Measure it by the life you plant in the shadows. You are the map, my boy. Walk with your head high. I folded the letter and tucked it into my jacket right next to Thatcher's old pocket watch. I looked out at the students crowded around a microscope in our field station, their eyes wide with the same wonder I felt when I was 14. I realized then that the silence my parents forced upon me was never a prison. It was a preparation. It taught me to listen to the things that truly matter, the whisper of the wind, the pulse of the earth, and the quiet strength of the overlooked. If you are listening to this and you feel invisible in your own family or your own life, I want you to know that you are not alone. You do not need their permission to exist. You do not need their applause to be valuable. You are a seed, and the very dirt they try to bury you in is exactly what you need to grow. I am Orion, and this is my legacy. If my story has reached you, if it has reminded you of your own hidden strength, please subscribe and join us. Every share and every comment helps this voice reach past the walls that once tried to silence me. We are building something undeniable together.